Good evening, CR family. Thank you for joining us for online large group. We miss getting to see everyone every week, and we hope that you are all doing well, staying safe and healthy. And thank you again for joining us. I am happy that we get to be together, even though it's not as we are used to, but I'm glad that we still are able to connect. So, the title of our lesson tonight is When Praying Feels Hard. So, over the last couple of weeks, I know my family has been through some adjustments, as I'm sure yours has as well. We've spent a lot of time together, and we have made some great memories. We have laughed, we have enjoyed each other's company, and we've had some times that we have not laughed as well, and maybe not as enjoyed each other's company quite as much because, again, it's an adjustment. You know, there's some stress and there's some uncertainty at this time that most of us are facing. Job changes, economic concerns, health concerns. We all have a level of stress that we can handle comfortably, and when it gets over that, it can be very difficult. Think about for a moment, what are your coping skills for managing stress? We all have ways that we tend to cope when we're feeling stressed. We have things that we do to help us cope. So think about that for a minute. What are your go-to ways of coping with stressors? Hopefully, you're able to think right away of some healthy, helpful things that you do to help with managing stress. I know some of mine are exercise, reading, listening to music, all good things. But there also can be some coping mechanisms that aren't as healthy and helpful that we can fall into if we're not careful, and we need to also be aware of those. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Miranda. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I am overcoming anxiety. And when I get stressed, one of my not as helpful things that I can tend to fall into is something a close friend of mine calls my hibernation mode. So when I get overly stressed, sometimes I just want to go into hibernation mode. I want to not think, not be productive, just play a game on my phone that doesn't require any thinking, watch a documentary, just kind of space out. And when I get like that, it can even be difficult to pray. Now, you may be looking at your screen right now in horror thinking, I can't believe that she would just say that it's hard to pray. This is the time you should be praying the most. And yes, it is. And we know that as believers, we know that prayer is the most helpful thing that we can do in times of stress. But sometimes it feels hard. It feels hard to pray. So tonight I want to share with you what the Lord has been speaking into my heart over the past several days about what to do when it's difficult to pray. One of the first stories that I remember being taught about in Sunday school class was a story that's found in Daniel chapter 3 of the 3 Hebrew children. My mom was my Sunday school teacher at the time, and I can remember her teaching about this. I can even picture the pictures that she showed. There were some drawings that she showed that someone had drawn to go along with this story. And in my mind, I can still see that picture. Well, last Tuesday morning, after a few days of just kind of being in a funk and kind of feeling myself go into hibernation mode, I woke up about 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, just out of a deep sleep, with this story and these verses on my mind and heart. I had been praying, Lord, help me to do what I need to do. Help me through this. And again, felt this on my mind and my heart and went to these verses, and I want to share with you what I've been learning from them. So at the beginning of our story, Daniel chapter 3, I'm going to summarize some of the backstory just for the sake of time, but I really encourage you to go back and read this chapter in its entirety for yourself. So there was a king, King Nebuchadnezzar, and he constructed a 90-foot tall image that was overlaid with gold. And he called all the leaders and lots of people to dedicate this new statue, this new image that he had built. And he told everybody in attendance, he said, when you hear the music play, you have to bow down and worship this image. And if you don't do it immediately, you will be thrown into a fiery furnace. So the music started playing, the people there bowed down, started worshiping this statue, this image, as they were told to do. But there were 3 men there that didn't do it. They didn't bow down. They didn't serve the gods that King Nebuchadnezzar served, and they would not bow down and worship that image. So some people came and told on them to the king. They came and they said, "Oh, king, there are some Jews over here, and even though you've put them in position of leadership, they don't serve your gods, and when the music starts playing, they didn't worship the statue." And the king was very angry. He said, "Bring those men to me." So the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were brought before the king. And the king said, "Is it true? You didn't worship?" He said, "I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more chance at this. When the music plays, you got to bow down and worship this image. And if not, immediately we're going to throw you into a fiery furnace." And I want us to read together the answer that those 3 men gave to the king. We're going to start in Daniel chapter 3, verse 16, and read down through verse 18. Daniel 3, 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this manner. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image you have set up." So even though they were faced with a possibility of immediate death, these men said, "King, we're not even discussing this with you. We're not even going to talk about it. Our God is able to deliver us. But whether he does or whether he doesn't, we will not bow down and serve this and worship this image." So the king became even angrier than he was already. And he had the men bound, and he had the furnace heated up 7 times hotter than it already was. And the 3 men were taken to it and thrown in. The Bible says the fire was so hot that even the men who were given the job of throwing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into that furnace, those men were killed themselves because the heat was so strong and terrible. The king watched the whole thing from a distance, and as he peered into the fiery furnace where they had been thrown, he got quite the shock. Let's read Daniel chapter 3, verses 24 and 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. The Lord was walking in the fire with them." When I read those verses last week, the thought came to me, what if they had turned away from the Lord there in the fire? What if they hadn't walked with him? I had that thought, and I said to myself, that's so silly. Of course they walked with him. Of course they didn't turn away from him in the midst of the fiery furnace. And I felt the Lord whisper to my heart, that's what you do when you don't pray. When you become stressed and you go into this shutdown and don't pray, that's what you're doing. You're turning away from me in times of stress. And see, our family, that's just as much a bad idea for me as it would have been for them in that fire. We have to turn toward the Lord and allow him to walk through the difficult times with us. Is he able to instantly deliver us from hard times? Yes, he is. And there are times that he does that. But there's also times that he chooses to walk with us through difficult times, trials and tests, through the fire, if you will, to teach us, to draw us closer to him. Notice there in verse 24 how the king seems especially surprised that the men are no longer bound. That tells me they weren't just bound by rope or something that could have easily burned up. They were bound by something that the king was surprised that those chains, those whatever had them bound up, were gone. He was surprised by that. We have a saying around here that our hurts, habits, and hang-ups don't take off for holidays. That's why we continue meeting typically during the holiday seasons. Well, our hurts, habits, and hang-ups don't take off for virus pandemics either, do they? No, they don't. The men in the fire in Daniel chapter 3, they emerged with no injuries. Their clothing was intact. The Bible tells us there wasn't a hair on their head that was singed, and that they didn't even smell like smoke. But their chains, what had them bound, those were gone. What if the Lord can take this time that we're going through right now and use it, teach us, mold us, make us more like him, and set us free, continuing that good work that he has started. We can turn to him in times of trouble, and we can lean on him and depend on him to continue that good work, even in times of distress and stress and adjustment. The last thing I learned from rereading these verses over this last week is that I am free to worship. Feel like you're going through the fire right now? You are free to worship. Having trouble finding the strength to even pray? We are free to worship. Turn on some good worship music there in your home and just begin to offer the Lord some praise. Those men in the fire weren't trying to run out of that furnace. No, they were content to walk through the flames with the Lord for a while. There in the flames. I imagine there was some worship going on in there. Just think about it. They were thrown to what was supposed to be a violent, horrible death. And they're there completely unharmed. The fire's having no effect on them. And not just that, but they look around and there is the Lord with them in the flames. There was some praise and there was some worship going on. I can't imagine. Choose worship and praise today. That thing that you tend to do to help you cope, that thing that maybe isn't right, isn't good, turn to the Lord instead. Stand on the promises of his word today. The Lord says that we will not be tempted beyond that we can take. And we can stand on that today. Even in this time of adjustment, we can stand that we will not be tempted more than we can stand. We can say, Lord, I give this to you. I turn this tendency over to you. Help me, and I stand on your promise. I choose to allow you, Lord, to walk through these difficult times with me. A dear lady that I know just got laid off from her job that she had worked many, many years. And she said something that is so true. She said, it's easy to say, I trust God, when everything is going well. But when the difficult times come, that's when we truly have to put our trust in Him. When we can't see how things are going to work out, that's when we put our trust in the Lord. Let's choose to trust Him today. Let's choose to turn toward Him today. In the midst of our struggles, you are not alone. He is walking beside you and working on your behalf. And I believe that we are going to see some powerful testimonies come from this time. Please stay connected with us. We want to hear from you. You can message us here on Facebook. You can send us a text if you have our numbers. Please stay connected. We want to hear from you, to hear how you're doing. And we are very excited tonight. We are offering small group online through Zoom. So if you would like to participate in that, it's going to start at 7:30. You can text myself, you can text Pastor Jimmy, or you can send us a direct message here on Facebook. We will need your phone number and your email address so that we can send you an invite. Tonight we will have one ladies A to Z group and one men's A to Z group because this is just kind of a trial run. We've never done this before, but we're going to try it out, and I am so excited to get to see and hear from you via Zoom in a little bit.